So good afternoon, everybody again. My name is AJ Ehrenstein. I use he, him pronouns. I'm Dean of Beyond Barnard, and I am so glad that you all are here live on a beautiful afternoon here in New York City to join us for a conversation, the third in our E's of the workplace. That's the letter E. Emails in the workplace, an introduction. I'm super excited to give this talk. I haven't given this one before, and it's the last of my 2020 to 2021 academic year. So I'm going to bring the heat for my finale presentation of the academic year. I hope everybody's doing okay, that spring semester has gone well, that you're getting ready for finals, and that some of y'all who might be seniors on the call, any seniors here, give a thumbs up or or maybe like a cry emoji in the window if you want. Heading potentially out into jobs. And so we're excited to conclude this semester's programs, this semester's programs on professional development, professional identity, and exiting professional spaces. It's a pilot for a much larger series that we will begin in the fall. So thanks to those of you who've participated. Today's presentation is being recorded, so feel free to add your questions to the chat directly to me if you would like. You can also go off mute. We're going to be a relatively small group, so I never mind if people want to say something out loud. So here we go. Emails in the workplace, an introduction. Here are my goals for today. So we're going to start off with some introductions and talk about understanding this particularly strange genre of communication. I can remember when I first started out after college, I was getting emails from people who sat directly next to me in the cubicle adjacent to mine. And I was like, what is going on here? How come these people are just communicating via email? Can't they just stand up and talk to me? So we'll talk about that. I would love to hear about some of your experiences with emails in the workplace, but I'll make the assertion that adapting to communicating in the workplace, especially via email, is one of the hardest things about transitioning from a college environment to a work environment. This goes for those of you who are not going to internships or to full-time jobs quite yet, but maybe using email in a workplace at Barnard in your student job. That might be a different way that you use email in the class or certainly with your friends. I also want to just kind of lay out at the start that productivity software like Slack, for example, is doing some of the work of replacing or supplementing email. I'm going to talk mainly about email today, just because it is a common currency. Not every workplace uses those productivity platforms and quite yet. So we're going to talk primarily about email. The second and third things that I'm going to do is basically just go through some common do's and don'ts. And some of this is pulled directly from my experience in the workplace. Much of it is actually pulled from my experience in the Barnard workplace and in interactions with students, either from email good practices or practices that could be improved in my interactions with students, or also with colleagues. Just pulled a lot. I've been doing this in the workplace for a little more than 13 years. And so I'm bringing a little bit of my personal experience along with some best practices from other sources as well. And we'll end off with Q&A. So first thing as usual, I like to introduce myself a little bit, just for those of you who don't know me. There are some of you who have seen me present a couple of times before this year. So I'm going to try to mix up the slide a little bit. That's me. That's my shiny head. That is the last time I wore a tie, sometime in February of 2020. I live in Brooklyn with my wife, Gina. That is us standing in front of these gigantic granite formations in Patagonia on our honeymoon, which was dope. And it was the last time we traveled anywhere. And as we are now both, I have one vaccine done. I'm looking forward to traveling sometime again in the future. That's the OG Ehrensteins. That's my family. I grew up here in New York, just in Westchester County. Do I have anybody in Westchester, from Westchester on the call? Just throw an emoticon up. Or if you live in Brooklyn now, that's where I am in Prospect Heights. I'll throw you a wave out my window. We actually just bought a house up in the Catskills. So those are our interns. We have 5 goats that visit our property and mow our lawn essentially for us. That's just this past weekend. Gina and I went up and it was beautiful. The snow up in the mountains and it was relatively warm down below. So that's kind of our biggest new project. I love New York pizza. This is my favorite neighborhood pizza joint here in Prospect Heights. It's called Brooklyn Pizza Crew. I lived in Chicago for 7 years, but you will never convert me to Chicago style pizza. Any Chicagoans on the call, feel free to levy your complaints in the chat. I'm a dog person. All my cat people in the house, can I see like an applause in the chat? And dog people just give me the thumbs up. I'm kind of agnostic, but I do definitely get along better with dogs, and apparently these days goats. On the side, I am a writer as well. So one of the things I wrote about recently was the woman whose cartoon image you're seeing here. Her name is Elsie Gardine Connick. She was an important African-American women tennis player who played in the early 20th century and who has not gotten a ton of attention in the past because she kind of preceded some of the more major figures later in the century. So I'm interested in tennis. I'm interested in criticism. I was a complet and political and social thought major at the University of Virginia, and I've kind of held on to my intellectual commitments by writing on the side. And I love Barnard. I've been here for about 3 years. I always say this, if Student Life asks, I did not tell you whether that is me in the Millie costume or not, but please use context clues about this slide and make a determination for yourself. All right, so workplace email is a whole, I think you guys say vibe. I'm not sure if I am using that correct hashtag, but I'm doing my best to speak in your parlance, y'all. Especially in this Zoom environment where I have no idea how things are going when y'all are off camera. But what I really mean is that workplace email is its own genre of communication. That is, it is just another genre, which is to say it's not an alien form of communication that requires rules that are totally different to the ones that you are used to in the classroom or in your interactions generally at Barnard. Instead, it has some specific rules, some of which may look familiar to you. So these are some of the kind of these are my assertions about some of the rules of effective workplace email writing. I'll go through some of these. I looked up I was trying to find classical works of art featuring women artists. And I just loved the fringe on this Vermeer character, this lady writing by her desk. So make sure you have your sweet writing vest picked out. That's rule number 1 of the genre. But if you think about it, the rules of writing in the workplace do not differ substantially in many ways from the kinds of writing that you are doing in the classroom. The trick is to translate what you're doing in the classroom for the workplace. So for example, writing effective emails for the workplace requires you to think about the context in which you're writing and the audience to which you are writing an email. Your audience will be different and your tone should be different if you are addressing a supervisor versus a direct colleague. It may be different if you are in a situation where you are beyond a deadline or you are in advance of a deadline and are trying to kind of update colleagues on a project status. But just like in academic writing, you need to think about the context in which you're writing and the audience you're addressing your message to. One thing that's different about workplace email, I like to kind of set up a few of these differences, is that it's oriented around tasks, not oriented around arguments. And indeed, email in the workplace is a bad place to make an argument or to engage in a back and forth where opinions are different. I'll talk a little bit about emails that shouldn't have been sent as we get into the do's and don'ts. Emails are best in the workplace when they're oriented around specific actions that require a very cut and dry answer or can help individuals orient around a task that they want to accomplish. Just like argumentative essays, however, good workplace emails should have a clear main point. You shouldn't be burying why you're emailing someone all the way down in the end of the email. Just like a strong argumentative essay, it's beneficial when a thesis statement or when the main purpose of the email is right at the top of the document itself. So I want to talk a little bit more about this, but similar to it's around tasks and not argument, you should be thinking about aligning objectives in an email rather than convincing someone of a point. What I mean is that a lot of workplace email is about ensuring that individuals are on the same page. So instead of trying to, in an argumentative essay, make a unique claim that's kind of out in the wilderness and you're trying to forge new knowledge, email communication is all about ensuring that Sally understands what Stephanie is talking about, that the two of you know exactly what's going on. So precision in language is something that should be one of your main objectives. Instead of making a complicated multi-nested point, email should be direct so that you can align objectives. think it's important always to consider form and content. We'll talk about this in do's and don'ts. Form is essentially ensuring that your paragraphs are clean, that your grammar is clean, that you have proofread, and that there are no punctuation marks. I'm sorry, there should be punctuation marks, no spelling mistakes. You should also ensure that the content of the email is limited, right? Brevity is the soul of emails. For those of you who are writing 1,000-word emails explaining complicated situations to professors, or in some cases to Beyond Barnard, I want to make the suggestion that email is most effective when it is short. And we're talking like no more than a couple of hundred words maximum. The shorter the workplace email, the better. This in turn makes it easier for individuals to respond. You want to make it as easy as possible for folks who are potentially on their devices, potentially they're responding to emails late. You want to make it easy for them to help you, easy for them to send a quick response that is hopefully no longer than the email that you've sent in the first place. You also want to minimize responses. Email, it gets less effective the more times that workplace emails have to go back and forth. Whenever there is a rapid exchange that requires additional people and more responses, I always suggest picking up the phone or hopping on a Zoom and trying to resolve whatever problem is going on via your voice and image as opposed to in an email. Just like papers that you're writing, it helps to think about cross-disciplinary outreach, which is to say, in any workplace, individuals across departments may not be familiar with the work that you do. So it's always helpful to clarify what you're doing in your immediate surrounding before making an ask. And again, once more, there are always length limits on argumentative essays, but you want to keep emails really short. Those are what I think are the basic rules of the genre. But what does it mean for emails that operate within these rules to be different than the emails that you may be used to writing in academic settings? So the first is the pace. I often hear that student inboxes are crammed. Like, guarantee you, one of the things that is different about workplace email is just the pace. The number of emails will increase every single year you are in the workplace. So for example, I looked it up. I have 68,000 emails in my inbox since my time at Barnard began just 3 short years ago. I tried to average this out. It works out to 80 received per weekday. I've also sent 37,000, which means that that's basically 40 sent every day. Even if every email requires only 2 to 3 minutes of attention, that's up to 4 hours a day on email. Now, emails obviously don't all take 3 minutes of attention, writing or receiving, but you can see very quickly how an inbox can get out of control. So you have to dedicate time in every day just to tend to your inbox. That may not be something that people do right now. In fact, I'd be interested to see if anybody makes time in their day specifically for responding to emails. So throw an emoticon, throw a thumbs up in your chat if you're already doing that. I would recommend throwing time onto your schedule every day for responding to email and making sure that it's not the very first thing that you do in the morning if you can help it. You want to start getting to your inbox maybe after the first cup of coffee, maybe after you kind of get going with some other intellectual task, just so your day doesn't start immediately with your inbox. I can't emphasize this enough, especially when it comes to emails with faculty members who are, deeply intellectual, who are used to engaging long arguments. In a professional context, the length of emails tends to be surprisingly short. They tend to be much faster. The turnaround time is expected to be much quicker. I usually like to ensure that no email sits unresponded to in my inbox for any more than 24 hours. If I can't get to a task, I like to tell people, hey, I see your email. I'll get back to it. I'm just swamped right now. It's on my list of things to do. That is a standard practice, to respond quickly to emails in most workplaces, even if it is just to say, I see your message. I can't get to it right now, but here's when I will get to it. And finally, I think one thing that's significantly different about workplace email versus email in other contexts is its tone. It can be sometimes inscrutably formal and dry. And sometimes this really surprises and puts people off when they're first entering the workplace from college or doing a student job. The fact of the matter is that humor can complicate workplace interactions when it's in email, especially with individuals who you are supervised by, who you may be supervising, it's best to leave humor and sarcasm out of workplace emails, if at all possible, and certainly until you establish rapport with individuals, because it's important to be direct and ensure that you are not losing your meaning for just for the sake of telling a joke or for being funny. I'll talk a little bit more about this in do's and don'ts. What is often surprising about workplace email? Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, you're not going to be sending your emails via typewriter. That's my Remington typewriter, which my brother-in-law got for me for my birthday last year, which was awesome. And this is this is actually the post office in Mexico City. I don't know if any of y'all have been there, but they don't make post offices like this anymore. But the good news is you're not going to necessarily be sending too many letters in the context of your workplace. So what's often surprising when students talk to me about email is the amount of time necessary to manage an inbox. Inbox zero, getting rid of all of your inbound email, is really hard to do, and it's sometimes not worth the psychological and intellectual pressure necessary to get there, right? What you need to get used to is how much time does it take you to get through a reasonable amount of email in your inbox every day. And again, I suggest setting up time in a recurring way every day to make sure that you're getting through all necessary correspondence. That speaks to the challenge of inbox management. I really recommend, especially when you're starting a new gig and you get a new email address and you have that pristine inbox for the first time, setting up filters, setting up sub inboxes so that you can quickly file away correspondence is really important to staying organized and ensuring that when you need to find it, it is easy to find an email that can show that you have been working on a task, that you have the kind of data you need, that you can catch up on a previous conversation where a colleague agreed to do something and you need to find that email quickly. Managing your inbox up front, creating filters, creating sub inboxes takes a lot of time, but that investment of time up front will pay off in the long run. I think it's often surprising how quickly individuals expect to receive responses in the workplace. And the fact that many times, especially, I think especially when you're just starting out, but it still can happen. Some supervisors will be on emails 24/7. You will get emails at 11 p.m., 12 a.m. And the question is often, do they expect a response right now? I think in almost all cases, it is important, especially in the early part of your career, to try to manage the expectations of the people who are managing you. If you are working 9 to 5, it should be that you are not expected to respond to emails after work hours in most instances. But that's going to depend on the workplace culture. And there are some workplaces and some jobs where email will extend beyond normal working business hours. It's going to be a question for you to adapt to that culture and to understand how your colleagues use email and during what hours email most often comes in. It's often surprising also how tone affects the response. It is really important to understand that in the workplace, it is not very often, it's not common practice to give criticism or to deliver bad news via email first. It is often much more effective to talk on the phone in person, once we're back in person, or via some form of video chat to talk about some kind of critique, criticism, bad news, asking for vacation, things that you need, doing that via a personal exchange where people can see your voice, you can hear your voice, can see your face. It's often much more effective, and then following up via email. But I would say overall that adapting to workplace communication, and email in particular, is one of the single most challenging aspects of transitioning from a college space to the workplace. And yet it is one thing that people do not designate enough time to thinking about. So I think it would behoove you, if you're heading into internships this summer, if you're heading into a new student job, if you're a senior and you're heading out into the workplace full time, to dedicate time to just spending a minute or two thinking about, how am I going to be communicating with people in email? What kind of tone do I want to establish for myself when I'm beginning a new role? I think it's always easier to start more formal and then ratchet back as you adapt to the culture, as opposed to starting informal. And this is especially troubling or challenging for individuals now. Workplaces can be more informal in certain industries, I'm thinking about tech, I'm thinking about marketing and advertising, thinking even to a certain extent nonprofit work. Sometimes the exchanges can feel very informal, or supervisors are informal inbound to your inbox. This does not necessarily give you the permission to be informal in response. Again, I think it's always easier to be formal in the beginning and ratchet back that formality as you get more used to the workplace culture. I'd be curious to hear your experiences so far, and I'm just going to let you guys put this in the chat since y'all are off video this afternoon. But I'm curious to hear some of your initial experiences with adapting to workplace email. And if you have questions that you brought to this presentation and you want to put those in the chat, like I had this experience in email and it was really challenging for me to navigate, feel free to use the chat to put that in there now. But I'd just be interested to hear some of the experiences that you've had using email to communicate in your student jobs, or maybe even using email to communicate in an academic setting where you potentially had to connect with faculty or new people for the first time. So if you have a minute, I would love it to see some of the chatter in the chat about what's bringing you here today, what you're hoping to learn about, and maybe some experiences that you've had in email that have brought you here this afternoon, aside from getting paid for it. By the way, if you have a student job, make sure that you put in this hour as part of your time this week. I'm gonna take a quick swig of tea. Okay, so now that we've established some common rules of the genre, now that we've talked a little bit about what's surprising for individuals when they transition to the workplace with respect to email, what might be surprising or especially difficult, I want to go to some best practices about how you can actually prepare to write more effective emails once you're in the workplace. Here's the overall list, and then I'll go through them one by one. And keep in mind, this is some email best practices. It's not intended at all to be an all-inclusive or comprehensive list. Instead, it's basically an outline of some of the most commonly cited best practices, along with some things that I've adapted from the workplace at Barnard and interacting with students at Barnard. By the way, the picture is from a really cool place in the neighborhood just south of Hyde Park in Chicago, where I used to live. It's called the Stony Island Arts Bank. What you're looking at in the red volumes there is the complete collection of Ebony magazine. It's where the entire archive lives, and it's just the coolest reading room I think I've ever seen. It's really awesome. So writing emails worth preserving is what I was thinking about there. Your emails will likely not end up in a library, but hey, we can aim for the stars, right, y'all? So the first thing is, should this email be instead a conversation? Some of the biggest trouble that folks get into when it comes to workplace email is that they're trying to make a contentious point or trying to respond to criticism or calling out a colleague for work that they are owed via email, when it's really important to understand that everybody is typically trying their best. And it is good to have a conversation, to pick up the phone, to not use email first, because tone can be really challenging in email. Everything sounds more severe in email. I'm sure that some of you have gotten, like, there's been articles written about this, text messages that end with thanks with a period and how harsh that sounds. There's a ton of conversation about what punctuation is appropriate to use in text messaging. Well, the same goes for email. So let's talk about a little bit about how emails can sometimes be better staged as conversations. I want you to think about your subject lines and how subject lines in the workplace can help people answer your question quickly and efficiently. I want you to think about who your audience is. I want to think about how efficiency in the way that you write your email is related to being task-oriented and ensuring that individuals can very quickly get to the point of your email to respond quickly. I want to think a little bit more about tone and assuming good intent, and I'll have something to say there about the exclamation point. We'll talk about proofreading very quickly, the best ways to sign off. And I want to emphasize gratitude and acknowledgement as especially effective affective modes in emails, which is to say that saying thank you, emphasizing your appreciation for another person's work, and trying to anticipate that they're doing a ton, that they have their own complicated inbox, but that can tend to elicit responses. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about follow-up. When is it appropriate to follow up with individuals after you've sent them an email? And a question came in from one of y'all directly to me. And I find emails hard to control. The inbox just keeps piling up. And sometimes it can be difficult to draft a formal response in a short time frame. So the person wants to ask when they can use dear, hi, or to whom it may concern, and are there other alternative email headers? So great question. We'll get into that when we talk about who is your audience. And again, I just want to emphasize for everyone, the hardest thing about email is the management. So email inboxes are really like gardens, although they can sometimes turn into jungles. What I mean by this metaphor is the more that you tend, or the more regularly you tend to your inbox, if you can set an egg timer or your watch, your iPhone for an hour a day just to trim your inboxes, to star things that really are important, to categorize emails away into sub inboxes, that will pay off and help with your inbox management a tremendous amount. It's much easier than letting your inbox pile up for a week and then try to get through the entire backlog on Friday afternoon when you're especially uninterested in getting to your emails. Okay, so let's just go kind of point by point here. And again, questions are welcome throughout. Does this email need to be sent right now? So one way that I like to catch up on my emails, but not burden other people's inboxes and not get responses late at night, is I sometimes will wait to get to some emails that require more thought at the end of the workday. I may wait until 4:45, 5 o'clock to get to emails that I know I need to spend a little more time on. But then you can click schedule send, turn on schedule send in your Gbear, and you will never regret it. That means you can schedule your email response to go out at a given time. I usually schedule it for something like 8:30 in the morning the following day. This will allow you to get the email out of your inbox, to clear it away to your sub inbox, to file it, to make a note of it, whatever you need to do, and you will not get another response to that thread that evening. So you know it's sent out, but it won't reach another person's inbox until they're fresh in the morning. It's a great way to try to schedule things out and manage. Here's the other thing. Some of these quotes are things that I say a lot. So I was going to email you, but thought phone would be easier. So I think it's often, especially when you can feel the pressure of an email exchange going up in the workplace, to just stop the email exchanges and said, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about this instead. This is related to the effectiveness of leaving an email in your draft folder overnight. Don't ever email angry. That old adage that grandparents tell us about, don't go to bed angry when you're married. Right? Don't email while angry. Try to keep yourself from hitting send in response to an email that has caused some distress, that has made you feel upset, that has maybe given you feedback that you didn't expect. Try not to respond immediately and consider options before just replying to the sender. In some cases, it may be more appropriate to reach out to somebody else. If it's an especially egregious comment, it may be that your best recourse is not to respond to that email, but to think about who else you can loop into the conversation to marshal resources, a colleague, human resources. Sometimes it's best to write the email that you want to write that makes you feel good because you're getting back really fast, but to keep it in your draft folder. Sleep on it. When you wake up in the morning, that email may look like something you don't want to send anymore. But often also, email is not something that's really good for navigating challenging or complex situations. And so I often will pick up the phone and call a colleague, or I'll chat them in GChat and say, hey, do you mind if we get on Zoom for just a quick second? I have 5 questions, and it'll be much faster to address this via chat than in person. Often I find out that a colleague's having a really bad day and they just sent an email because they say, oh, you know what, I just found out that my dog has COVID or whatever it is. I'm trying to be a little egregious here. But something is making them send an email that is a little off kilter, and it's best to just hear their voice, see your face. Remember that everybody is a person and everybody is trying to manage their email backlog and their tasks every day. Okay, subject lines that are not, hey. I find too often students, in my own context of Barnard, but often colleagues as well, send me an email that I can't tell what the content of the email is until I open it, until I get all the way to the middle of the message. But also for you sending messages, if you try to search for an email and you know that the subject line was "Hey" and you look for that in your search function, you are going to find 8,000 emails. So what I like to do to try to short circuit that, make it easier for the person that is responding to me to address my question, but also for me to go back and find that subject or find that email in the future, is to be specific in the subject line. So I like colons a lot. Project update, diversity assessment. That's the name of the project I'm working on, and I'm telling the person that it's an update. To the best of your ability, you should put the thing that you are talking about in the subject line. So if you are making a request, I like to say request colon and then what you are asking for. Help the person opening the email understand right away what the thing is that they are going to be reviewing. When reaching externally, and I find that this is especially effective for writing emails in the workplace, let's say if you're emailing someone you want to network with, I always like to use the language of invitation. So invitation to conversation or hello from Barnard, something friendly that gives people a sense of them being asked to something nice, and calling out the affinity or the shared area of interest that will make it likelier for them to respond. So I find with students writing networking emails all of the time, hello from Barnard or outreach from current Barnard student is really helpful. Next is, who is your audience? So in the workplace, when you are addressing a supervisor, it's often just good to clear up right away what you should be calling that person. So is it Dear Dr. X? Is it Dear David? Sometimes we call people, this happens with faculty all of the time. They might not want to be called Dr. Smith. A good indicator, and this kind of goes to the question that was asked already, people will tell you how they want to be addressed in the way that they sign their emails to you. So if you are concerned about whether somebody wants to be called Dr. Smith or David, look to how they sign their emails. If they sign their emails David, you should definitely reach out back David. If you're reaching out to Professor Smith for the first time, or someone in your organization for the first time, and they haven't emailed you yet, then it's perfectly acceptable to say, Dear Dr. Smith or Dear Professor Smith. I find that in most workplaces, once you're out of college, it's important to address people mostly by their first name. This means that you are an adult. You are no longer a student. You no longer have to address people by their title first. Also, in an era of heightened gender pronoun awareness, greetings like Dear Sir or Madam have gone a little bit by the wayside. If you're addressing an email to a broad audience and you do not know who the person receiving it, if you're addressing, for example, a kind of open inbox, you can say to whom it may concern, or I like Dear Colleagues, something that establishes a connection, but that doesn't run into the challenges that are attendant to gendered language. This is part of the question that was asked as well. I like to steer away from hey or hi until you have established an actual relationship with the person. Again, it's better to say Dear X and be more formal in your initial interactions, and then move away from that. You can always follow a little bit the culture of the organization that you're working in, but start more formal. It's really hard to ratchet up your formality. So hey or hey there, or hey ho, try to steer away from that, especially in the beginning of your tenure at an organization. One more thing I want to say here is it can be really effective to call out who is on the thread. So let's say you're addressing two people, Monica and Paul, but you want to make sure that they know that Nathan, their colleague, is CC'd. I will sometimes include that, right? Usually you CC colleagues to whom the message is not actually addressed, but you just want to keep them in the loop. They are someone who should know what's going on, but they may not be necessary to respond to the question that you're asking in an email. I can talk about CC in a little bit too, if that's helpful. Okay, another great thing, once you get into the body of the email, again, you want to try to go right at the start. So the less filler, the better. This is a personal opinion. So I don't like filler language like happy Monday, happy Tuesday. I had a colleague at the University of Chicago. I collected emails and I got a happy whatever day it was for all 5 days of the week. I remember I shouted at my colleague when I finally collected all five. But you don't necessarily need to put filler language at the top of emails. Right now, this is maybe a COVID specific point. I found that last year, especially in March and April, there was a lot of, I hope you are okay during these uncertain times. And there is a way that this becomes a kind of joke, right? This kind of knee-jerk reflex that we all express in emails. And you'd get 20 emails in a single day, like, I hope you're okay during this uncertain time, to where it doesn't even mean anything anymore. I like to save those kinds of expressions of solidarity and hope that things are okay for the final line of the email. Hope everything is okay with you. Give me a shout if anything's going on. I'm happy to make time later in the week if you want to chat and catch up. Typically in the workplace, people are anxious to get their tasks done. This is a matter of personal preference, but I definitely think like happy Monday exclamation point is something that, people tend to get tired of pretty quickly. Also, that kind of filler language can prevent you from getting to the tasks that you want done. So there are three things that, I'm recommending in this slide here with these three call outs. Calling out individuals who you are addressing. Let's say you're talking to Wanda, Sally, and Bill after a meeting, let's say, and this is a follow-up email, saying, at Wanda, you agreed to do this. At Bill, you agreed to do this. And Sally, you and I said we would hang back and see what the results of that project were before we would move forward. B, using email as a way to identify who is supposed to do what is really helpful, especially after meetings and conversations. Similarly, I wanted to follow up on our conversation to identify 3 key tasks. This can be really good, and it's a way that you should use email in the workplace to your advantage as you're getting started in a role. After any meeting, I like to try to send a follow-up to say, hey, I just want to follow up on what we just talked about. That way, if you need to go back to the steps that you mutually agreed on with a colleague, you can always go back to the follow-up email and say, no, we discussed this, this, and this, and I just want to make sure that those tasks get done. I'm a big fan also of bullet points. Bullets make it much easier for people to get to the specific tasks that you're hoping to get done in the email, the specific questions. So if you want to say, these are the salient issues, 1, 2, 3. Thanks so much again. I'm happy to provide updates as appropriate. Making it easy for people to scan an email on their phone or on their desktop. Bullets are a great way to do that, and it's always really appreciated. Moving pretty quick, but again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. Also, if this is like nowhere near what you were expecting, when I have students in the room and they're like rolling their eyes, I can always stop and be like, guys, what's going on? But you can roll your eyes metaphorically at me in the chat. Okay. In terms of tone, I find it really helpful to be extra positive in email, right? Because email flattens affect, because it always feels like email is just dry, it is a little bit advantageous to express things more exclamatorily than you might otherwise in normal conversation speak. Like, I would never say in conversation, it was totally fantastic to meet with you. And yet in email, I say it all of the time, right? So heightening the emotion, the kind of positive affect in an email can make your overall message, the thing that you're asking, a little bit easier to get to, right? Making folks feel comfortable with what was positive about an interaction, or I like saying, please let me know what else I can do to advance the project, or as always, just feel free to provide feedback. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to get to anything that you need. For those of you who've emailed me before, I see some familiar names on the list. I hope I've been doing, I feel like I do this all the time. Like, just trying to be exclamatory, it helps disarm people. No one likes sending an email to ask for something, right? And so when you are a little bit more upbeat in your tone, it makes it a little bit easier to feel like, okay, hello, Thank you so much for that presentation. I have 3 follow-ups. Give your follow-ups. I appreciate, again, the fact that you took the time. Looking forward to next steps. These things are really common. I remember when I first got into the workplace, the number of exclamation points was a little surprising to me. The kind of positive affect in email was a little bit, just it wasn't something I was accustomed to. But you get used to it, right? And I think that it's important, especially now, instead of, I hope you're okay during these troubled times. I think it's important to actually try to identify with people. So if they said something especially meaningful in a conversation, if you're connecting with them because you're especially excited about a particular aspect of their work, if you can say something that's a little less generic, and identify with what's distinctive about them or what specifically you need from them, I think that's always helpful. I'm going to say this once more. I said it already. Please proofread. My mother, God love her, she is not a big iPhone aficionado. And she sends me emails that look like E.E. Cummings poems, right? There's no punctuation, no capitalization. I'm sure some of you have this experience getting emails from all sorts of family members in your life about how things are going and how much they love you. But when it comes to workplace emails, the seriousness of your message is lost when there are spelling errors, when there are capitalization issues, when there's improper punctuation, and when what comes in the inbox is just a blob of text instead of well-organized paragraphs. This really matters. I don't know if those of you, for some reason, all of my YouTube ads are for Grammarly. It's like, writing is everything that I do. And I kind of always roll my eyes at these advertisements that I'm fed. But it really is true. You do need to ensure that your grammar and spelling are proofed, right? And it doesn't need to be perfect. You can certainly be a little informal in the maybe sentences that are, don't have a subject, or just like looking forward to seeing you, period, is not a sentence, but you don't have to say I am looking forward to seeing you. But make sure that you are proofing your messages before they go out the door. In terms of sign off, when you're writing with your friends, you can sign off your emails however you want. But I often refer to an article that I read a long time ago now that's been a good guiding light, is best is worst. So signing your emails best is not something that you need to do. Bests, warmly, cheerfully, hugs, high fives, signing off your email with any of those is not necessary. Most often, I advocate ending emails with thank you, sincerely, if it's very, very formal, or just saying, what is the next step? So I will follow up on Tuesday to see if you need anything else. Thanks in the meantime, one exclamation point, and then your name. You should always also have an email signature. So if you're at Barnard and you just want to have a signature for engaging with professors, I suggest your full name, your Barnard year, Barnard and your year, your major, and potentially your LinkedIn profile. Once you're in a workplace, you will most likely be assigned a signature that everybody has to abide by. But I think my main point here is cheers, all of these kind of they're really well-intentioned. Warm regards, warmth, stay warm, not necessary in the workplace. It is effective to end with appreciation, gratitude, and just your name. On that point, expressing what you're grateful for, saying at the very start of an email, thanks again for the thing that you sent me. I wanted to provide feedback on X, Y, and Z. Everybody is working so hard, everybody always works hard, right? This is the thing. Everybody's got a life. People have kids and pets and plants that they have to take care of and inboxes of their own to manage. It's always a good practice in email to say, thank you for that, or I appreciate you for doing this. It helps get a response, but it's also just the right thing to do. And I think, the other thing here is just acknowledging people want to know that you got their email. No one in the history of the world has missed an email, but I can't tell you the number of times I get an email that says, I didn't see your email. It must have gone to spam. It's like that probably didn't happen. So you want to just say, hey, I saw your email. I'm totally swamped right now. I promise to get back to it. On follow-up, it's important in email to say when you plan to follow up with someone. or to invite follow-up at a specific time if someone owes you, or if you think you're going to have trouble getting to a task by a certain time. It's always appropriate to follow up on an email in the workplace if you give a deadline in your first email. So let's say it's Monday and you say, hey, I'm sorry, but I really need this by Wednesday. Is that doable? I'll follow up then regardless. Then that person expects to hear back from you on Wednesday. Students ask me all the time, when is it appropriate to follow up on an initial email? The answer is you get to say when you're going to follow up if your initial email has a follow-up date in it. Hey, thanks again for doing this. I'll follow up in 10 days if I don't hear from you before then. Then you can just reply in 10 days and say, hey, I said I was going to follow up. I'm just bumping this to your top of your inbox. Realize you're totally swamped and this is a busy time, but let me know if you're able to get back to me. Set expectations for when follow-ups will happen. Those are the do's, and I wanted to spend more time on the do's than the don'ts, just to try to lead with the positive. If you guys are still alive out there, can you throw an emoji up just so I know that I'm not speaking to a black wall here? Okay, at least one. Thanks, appreciate you all. All right, so here's the tougher talk, and I know BuzzFeed articles tend to focus on the negative. Don't do this, or you'll be in email hell forever. But here are some practices to avoid. The first is replying all, especially to really long chains. You'd be surprised how often this happens accidentally even. Just ensure that you are not clogging tons of people's inboxes by replying all to a message. If you have specific feedback that you need to get to the sender of an email, it's best to go directly to them. I really, really encourage this. You all will get brand new email addresses when you're at an internship or when you're at a new job. I like to call it the kind of separation of church and state. Keep your personal email away from your work inbox. There may be security issues with using your personal email, with using your work email for personal stuff. You may not actually own your emails if they are being served up by your employer. Your employer may reserve the right when you sign on to open your inbox, to look at your email. And I don't want this to sound like Orwellian. It's just assumed that work email is for work. And it's much better for you to keep your friends, your significant others, your emails about doctors in your personal correspondence. So I would suggest even, creating a personal Gmail account that is separate from your Gbear account if you want to engage personally. I actually find it really surprising that Barnard students use personal email for their Barnard correspondence. I would really emphasize you get used to this as a student. Use your Barnard email for your Barnard obligations and your personal email for non-Barnard obligations. I really encourage people to stay away from blind carbon copying. Here's the reason. If you want to send an email to a colleague and you want someone else to be like, look at this email I'm sending, you're BCCing them. That means the recipient of the email will not see that your pal or your colleague is blind carbon copied. However, I've seen this happen many times. A person doesn't realize they are blind carbon copied. They will reply all. And suddenly, a person you didn't want to know that somebody else was on the email thread will know right away. This happens far too often. It's a very passive-aggressive thing to use. I really discourage its use generally. So just keep an eye open for it. You will have colleagues who, BCC you on things. Be careful when replying. Again, it's a great reason not to reply all. I want to kind of actually put abbreviating and emojiing together. I think emojis in workplace emails are, we're not there yet as a society, as a culture, to put tons of emojis in emails. I, just in terms of cultural practice at Barnard, will probably put a laugh emoji or just a thumbs up to say that I've gotten, like, a conversation is over. If you ever get an email from me and there's 2 thumbs up, I'm not responding to that thread anymore. It's done. Like that's my shorthand for just being like, okay, this is great. Have a good night. I see 2 of my colleagues on here. I hope they're laughing quietly because I definitely have sent that to them. But you have to understand the workplace culture, right? If it's a emoji happy company, sure, you can get used to it. But again, don't start there. I also want to suggest I know I've said positive affect is usually a good thing, but avoid overusing the exclamation point. How many is too many? Well, it's got to be a gut check. You should always be reading over to see how many times you use this, favored of punctuation marks in in emails. I try not to use more than two, one at the beginning, one at the end. Always after a thank you, I'm going to put an exclamation point, but don't overuse it. We've talked about adopting a humorous tone. It's not going to be a benefit to you, especially, and this can be hard, right? You're in a new workplace, you want to make new friends, maybe you're a funny person in IRL, but using jokes and humor, especially sarcasm in email, can come off as abrasive, it can come off as inappropriate, and you just don't want to assume that your joke will not be forwarded. So be very, very cognizant of this, that anything that you put in writing in an email may be forwarded. This goes to my point of requesting conversations and personal interactions using your voice or potentially visual video chat or in-person conversations before you send criticism, before you send critique, negative feedback, complaints, things that could obviously be very legitimate. But if you forward let's say a complaint directly to your supervisor about kind of feedback that you've received, it's very likely that that email will be forwarded somewhere else. It's best to first have a conversation and then follow up. And then, this isn't a conversation today about protocols around etiquette. We talked about professional identity a few weeks ago. Some of you may have been there. This can be very hard. There's all sorts of feedback that you might want to provide to colleagues in the workplace. It may be, again, sit on your email. It may be more appropriate, instead of emailing your direct supervisor, to go to human resources. It may be more appropriate to go to a different colleague. But just don't assume that your note won't be forwarded, because it can be. The last two we've talked about a little bit, but I think letting your inbox get out of control is, again, one of the most important things that you should try to avoid. So again, 1 hour a day to try to just trim around the edges of your inbox and keep it down if possible. The last is really don't set a precedent of responding late. Use auto send. If you need to work late to get back to your emails, try to auto deploy them for the morning. When you send emails late, people ask questions like, why is this person up so late emailing? Like, they should go to bed. This is not an emergency. Oftentimes I think that it conveys a kind of urgency that you may not want to be conveying in your communications in the workplace. These are all learning experiences, by the way. I hope some of you aren't sitting there thinking, oh my God, I've definitely emailed X person at 1 in the morning, blah, blah, blah. It happens. I just would hope that it's not a common practice, or that you can get out of the habit of emailing too late and instead thinking about how an email that appears in someone's inbox fresh in the morning will have a different tenor, a different reception. So there you have it. I've laid out about 15 do's and don'ts. We've talked about emailing as a genre. We've talked about some best practices for coordinating in the workplace. We've got a couple of more minutes, and so I want to kind of give us a second to ask any outstanding questions, things you were hoping I would get to, loose ends, even just I love random questions about email. I actually love talking about communicating in this way. This is especially a strange genre of communication. So lay it on me if you have any questions. And obviously, if you need to go, I just want to say thank you for taking time this afternoon. Go outside and enjoy the fresh air. But if you have questions, I'm here. You can come off come off mute, or you can ask your questions in the chat. And for those of you at home, thanks for watching. We'll pause the recording there so that folks can ask questions here. How are you doing, guys? You got anything for me?